The story of humanity did not begin with kings or empires. It did not begin with pyramids or armies. It began with survival. Long before the first city rose from the earth, before the first written word was carved into stone, before the first crown rested upon a ruler's head, there were only small groups of humans, scattered across a dangerous and unpredictable world. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived as hunters and gatherers. They moved with the seasons. They followed migrating animals. They searched endlessly for food, water, and shelter. Every day was uncertain. Every night was dangerous. The world was vast, wild, and indifferent to human survival. Yet despite the danger, humans possessed something no other species had ever developed to such an extent. Imagination, the ability to cooperate, to plan, to create tools, to share knowledge across generations. These abilities would change everything. For most of human history, the population of the entire planet was tiny. Perhaps only a few million people lived across all continents combined. Small tribes rarely encountered one another. Most humans lived and died within a few miles of where they were born. But around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The climate began to change. The last ice age slowly came to an end. Glaciers retreated, temperatures warmed, rain patterns shifted. New plants began to grow in regions that had once been frozen or barren. For the first time in history, certain areas of the world became incredibly fertile. And in one particular region, between two great rivers, the course of human history changed forever. This land would later be called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Here, wild grains grew in abundance, wheat, barley, grasses rich with edible seeds. At first, humans simply gathered these plants as they always had. But gradually they began to notice patterns. Seeds dropped into the soil would grow into new plants. Plants that were watered grew stronger. Fields near rivers produced far more food than wandering through the wilderness. Slowly, over generations, an idea formed. What if humans did not need to wander anymore? What if food could be grown intentionally? This idea marked the beginning of the agricultural revolution. It was the most important turning point in human history. Humans began clearing land, planting seeds, watering crops, harvesting food. For the first time ever, humans could produce more food than they immediately needed. This changed everything. Surplus food meant survival during harsh seasons. It meant communities could remain in one place. It meant not everyone needed to hunt. Some people could now become builders, others craftsmen, others leaders. Villages began to form. Mud brick houses replaced temporary shelters. Families lived side by side. Communities grew larger and larger, and as populations increased, new challenges emerged. Disputes over land, disagreements over food, conflicts between neighbors. Human society was becoming more complex, and complexity required organization. Around 6000 BCE, the first large settlements began to appear across Mesopotamia. Among them, one city would become legendary: Uruk. Uruk was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Its population grew to tens of thousands. Massive walls surrounded the city. Temples rose above the skyline. Markets buzzed with trade and activity. For the first time in human history, people were living in what we would recognize as a true city. But a city required something new: administration. Someone needed to track food supplies, manage labor, record trade, collect taxes. Human memory was no longer enough. And so, one of humanity's greatest inventions was born: writing. At first, writing was simple: small clay tablets. Marks pressed into wet clay using reed styluses. These early symbols represented goods, grain, animals, tools. Over time, these symbols evolved into a full writing system known as cuneiform. With writ, knowledge could survive beyond a single lifetime. Laws could be recorded, stories could be preserved, history could be written. Human civilization had officially begun. Music slowly rises. But cities brought both prosperity and inequality. Not everyone benefited equally from this new way of life. Farmers worked long days under the sun. Laborers built massive structures. Yet a small elite began to control wealth and power. The first social hierarchies emerged. At the top were rulers and priests. Below them were scribes and merchants. At the bottom were farmers and laborers. Civilization created opportunity, but it also created inequality. And where inequality exists, conflict follows. As cities grew, competition for land and resources intensified. Neighboring cities began to fight. The first wars in human history began as conflicts between city-states. Armies formed, weapons improved, defensive walls grew taller and stronger. War had become a permanent part of civilization. Yet despite violence, cities continued to expand. Trade routes stretched across vast distances. Ideas traveled alongside goods. Cultures began to influence one another. Civilization was spreading. And soon, a new kind of leader would emerge. A ruler not satisfied with controlling a single city, but determined to control them all. The age of empires was about to begin. The rise of cities created a new kind of ambition. For the first time in history, rulers began to imagine something greater than a single city. They imagined domination. They imagined empires. Among the many city-states of Mesopotamia, power constantly shifted. Cities rose, cities fell. Alliances formed and collapsed. Wars became inevitable. And then, around 2334 BCE, a man emerged who would change the future forever. His name was Sargon. Sargon was not born into royalty. He was not the son of a king. According to legend, he began life as a child abandoned in a basket on a river. A humble beginning for the man who would become the first emperor in recorded history. Sargon rose through the ranks of the city of Kish. He became a trusted official, then a military leader, then a conqueror. He looked at the divided cities of Mesopotamia and saw opportunity. One by one, Sargon conquered them. Uruk fell, Ur fell, Lagash fell. For the first time, multiple cities were united under a single ruler. The Akkadian Empire was born. It was the world's first true empire. Sargon understood something revolutionary. Conquering territory was not enough. He needed to control it. He created a system of governors to rule distant cities. He built roads to connect his lands. He established a standing army to maintain order. For the first time, humans were learning how to govern vast territories. But empire came at a cost. Rebellions erupted constantly. Conquered cities resisted Akkadian rule. Maintaining control required relentless military force. And after Sargon's death, the empire slowly began to crumble. The lesson was clear. Empires were powerful, but they were fragile. Centuries passed. New kingdoms rose from the ruins of the Akkadian Empire. Among them, one city would rise to unmatched influence: Babylon. Babylon began as a small, unremarkable city, but around 1792 BCE, a king ascended its throne who would make it legendary: Hammurabi. Hammurabi was not just a conqueror, he was an organizer, a lawgiver, a ruler who understood that an empire required order. He expanded Babylon's territory through both war and diplomacy. But his greatest achievement was not military, it was legal. Hammurabi created one of the earliest and most complete legal codes in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. Nearly 300 laws carved into stone, publicly displayed for all to see. These laws covered everything: trade, marriage, property, crime, punishment. For the first time, laws were written and visible. Justice was no longer arbitrary. It was standardized. The famous principle emerged: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. To modern ears, the punishments may
sound harsh.
but in Hammurabi's time, the code represented fairness and order. Civilization was becoming more structured, more predictable, more complex. But while Mesopotamia flourished, another great civilization was rising along a different river, the Nile. Every year, the Nile River flooded its banks, leaving behind rich, fertile soil, perfect for farming. Unlike Mesopotamia, Egypt's environment was stable and predictable. The desert protected it from invasion. The Nile provided consistent food. This stability shaped Egyptian society. Egyptians believed in order, balance, harmony, and at the center of their world stood the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not merely a king. He was considered a god on earth, a living bridge between the human world and the divine. This belief gave Egyptian rulers immense authority, and with that authority, they undertook one of the most astonishing building projects in history, the pyramids. The most famous of these monuments rose on the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE. It stood as the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. Millions of stone blocks, each weighing tons, transported, lifted, and placed with astonishing precision. The pyramids were more than tombs. They were symbols of power, of belief in the afterlife, of humanity's desire to leave a permanent mark on the world. While Egypt thrived along the Nile, civilizations were also emerging far to the east, in the Indus Valley. Cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro displayed incredible urban planning. Straight streets, advanced drainage systems, public baths. These cities were remarkably organized, yet their civilization would mysteriously disappear around 1900 BCE. No clear evidence of invasion, no obvious catastrophe, only abandoned cities. History is filled with mysteries, and this was one of the greatest. Meanwhile, in the east, another powerful civilization was forming, China. Along the Yellow River, early dynasties began to rise. The Shang dynasty developed bronze technology, complex writing systems, advanced craftsmanship. Civilization was no longer confined to one region. Across the world, humans were building cities, developing governments, creating culture. Humanity was entering a new age, an age of expansion, an age of connection, an age of ideas. But with growth came competition, and soon civilizations would collide. As civilizations grew stronger, the world became smaller. Trade routes expanded across deserts and seas. Ideas traveled, goods traveled, stories traveled. And with connection came conflict. In the lands of Anatolia, a powerful civilization had been quietly growing. The Hittites, masters of metal, masters of war. They discovered something that would change warfare forever: iron. Bronze had shaped the early world, but iron was stronger, more durable, more deadly. The Hittites guarded the secret of ironworking carefully. Their weapons gave them a powerful advantage over their neighbors, and eventually, their ambitions brought them into direct conflict with Egypt. Two superpowers of the ancient world, two unstoppable forces. Their clash would become legendary: the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, one of the largest chariot battles in human history. Pharaoh Ramesses II marched north with thousands of soldiers, thousands of chariots, determined to crush the Hittite Empire. But the Hittites were ready. Through deception and espionage, they lured the Egyptian army into a trap. The battle that followed was chaos. Dust filled the sky, chariots thundered across the battlefield, soldiers clashed in brutal combat. Neither side achieved decisive victory. For the first time in history, two great powers realized something profound. War could destroy them both, and so they made a decision that would change diplomacy forever. They signed the first recorded peace treaty in human history, the Egyptian-Hittite Peace Treaty. A promise of non-aggression, a promise of cooperation. Humanity had learned a new
Strategy.
peace. Trade between the empires flourished. Technology spread. Prosperity followed. But peace is fragile. Around 1200 BCE, the world entered a mysterious and devastating period. The Bronze Age collapse. Across the Mediterranean and Near East, great civilizations began to fall. Cities burned, trade routes vanished, empires disappeared. The Hittite Empire collapsed. Mycenaean Greece fell into ruin. Many Egyptian cities were abandoned. Historians still debate the causes: climate change, earthquakes, invasions by the mysterious sea peoples, perhaps all of them together. For generations, the world plunged into darkness, a dark age. But darkness never lasts forever. From the ruins, new powers began to rise. In Greece, scattered villages slowly grew into city-states. Athens, Sparta, Corinth. These cities developed a new idea about governance. Instead of kings ruling by divine right, what if citizens ruled themselves? In Athens, a radical experiment began: democracy. Citizens gathered in assemblies. They debated laws. They voted on decisions. For the first time, ordinary people had a voice in government. It was imperfect. Women could not vote. Slaves had no rights. But the idea was revolutionary. Power could belong to the people. Meanwhile, another Greek city chose a different path: Sparta. Sparta became a warrior society. From childhood, Spartan boys were trained for combat, discipline, strength, loyalty to the state above all else. Two city-states, two different visions of society: democracy and militarism, philosophy and warfare. Their rivalry would shape the future of Greece. But while Greece experimented with new forms of government, a new power was rising in the east: the Persian Empire. And it would soon become the largest empire the world had ever seen. In the vast lands of Persia, a young ruler was preparing to change history. His name was Cyrus, Cyrus the Great. Unlike many conquerors before him, Cyrus ruled differently. He believed that an empire could not survive through fear alone. It needed loyalty, respect, trust. Cyrus began his rise by overthrowing the Median Empire. But instead of destroying his enemies, he welcomed them. He allowed conquered peoples to keep their religions, their traditions, their cultures. This strategy transformed enemies into allies. City after city fell to his expanding empire: Lydia, Babylon, Mesopotamia. In 539 BCE, Cyrus entered Babylon without a battle. He was welcomed as a liberator. The Babylonian captivity of the Jewish people ended. Cyrus allowed them to return home and rebuild Jerusalem. For many, he became known as a chosen ruler, a king who ruled not by terror, but tolerance. By the time of his death, Cyrus had created the largest empire the world had ever seen. But the Persian Empire was only just beginning. His successors expanded even further. Under Darius the Great, the empire reached its peak. From the Indus Valley to Egypt to the edges of Greece, an empire spanning 3 continents. To manage this massive territory, Darius created innovations that still shape governments today. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapies, each ruled by a governor. He built the Royal Road, a 2,500-kilometer highway connecting the empire. Messages could travel faster than ever before. Trade flourished. Communication thrived. For the first time, the ancient world was truly connected. But expansion brings tension, and in the West, the Greek city-states watched nervously. The Persian Empire was growing closer, and eventually the two worlds would collide. The Greco-Persian Wars. 490 BCE. King Darius demanded that the Greek city-states submit to Persian rule. Many did, but Athens refused. The Persian army sailed across the Aegean Sea and landed near the small town of Marathon. The Athenians were outnumbered, heavily outnumbered, yet they chose to fight. In a stunning and unexpected victory, the Greek forces defeated the Persians. The Battle of Marathon became legendary, a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. But Persia would return. 10 years later, Darius's son Xerxes launched a massive invasion. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers marched toward Greece, the greatest invasion the ancient world had ever seen. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, a small Greek force prepared to make a stand. 300 Spartan warriors, led by King Leonidas, alongside thousands of allied Greeks. For 3 days they held the pass, outnumbered, surrounded, outmatched. They fought to the last man. Their sacrifice bought time for Greece to prepare. Soon after, the Greek navy achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Salamis. Persia's invasion failed. The Greek city-states survived, and their culture would go on to shape the future of Western civilization. But Greece's greatest legacy was not war. It was thought. Athens became the center of philosophy. Great thinkers began asking profound questions. What is truth? What is justice? What is the meaning of life? Socrates challenged the minds of Athens. He taught through questions rather than answers. His student Plato founded the Academy, one of the first institutions of higher learning, and Plato's student Aristotle studied everything: science, politics, ethics, biology. Their ideas still influence the world today. Humanity was beginning to understand itself. But as Greek culture flourished, Greek unity faded. Rivalries grew. Tensions rose. Athens and Sparta went to war. The Peloponnesian War, a devastating conflict that lasted nearly 30 years. When it ended, Greece was exhausted, divided, weak. And to the north, a new power was rising: Macedon. And a young prince named Alexander was preparing to change the world forever. The young prince of Macedon had been raised for greatness. His name was Alexander the Third of Macedon. History would remember him as Alexander the Great. From childhood, he was trained by the greatest minds of his age. His tutor was Aristotle. He studied philosophy, science, medicine, strategy. But Alexander was not destined to be a scholar. He was destined to conquer. At just 20 years old, Alexander became king after the assassination of his father, Philip II. Many believed the young ruler would fail. They were wrong. Alexander inherited a powerful army, disciplined, experienced, loyal, and he inherited a mission: to conquer the Persian Empire. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont and entered Asia, the beginning of one of the most legendary military campaigns in history. His army faced the Persians at the Battle of Granicus. Alexander led the charge himself. Victory. Then came the Battle of Issus. Again, Alexander faced the Persian king Darius III. Again, he won. But the decisive moment came at the Battle of Gaugamela, a massive battlefield. A massive Persian army. War elephants, chariots, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Alexander's army was vastly outnumbered. Yet through bold strategy and fearless leadership, he broke the Persian lines. Darius fled. The Persian Empire collapsed. Alexander marched into Babylon, then Persepolis. The heart of Persia, the greatest empire in the world, had fallen. But Alexander was not finished. He pushed east into Central Asia, into India. His empire stretched from Greece to the Indus River, the largest empire the world had ever seen. But conquest came at a cost. His army was exhausted, far from home, longing to return. At the Hyphasis River, his soldiers refused to march further. Alexander was forced to turn back. In 323 BCE, in the city of Babylon, Alexander fell ill. Within days, he was dead. He was only 32 years old. His empire had no clear successor, and without him, it began to fracture. His generals divided the lands among themselves. The Hellenistic world was born. Greek culture spread across Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia. New cities rose. The greatest of them all, Alexandria in Egypt, a beacon of knowledge. home to the legendary Library of Alexandria. Scholars gathered from across the world. Mathematicians, astronomers, philosophers, human knowledge expanded at an unprecedented pace. But while the Hellenistic kingdoms flourished, in Italy, a small republic was growing. Quietly, relentlessly, Rome. Rome began as a small city on the Tiber River, a modest settlement surrounded by hills. But Rome had something rare: relentless ambition and discipline. After overthrowing their kings, the Romans created a republic, a new system of government. Power would not belong to a single ruler. Instead, elected officials governed the state, at least in theory. Roman society was divided into two main classes: the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the elite families, the old aristocracy. They controlled the Senate, the treasury, the military. The plebeians were the common people: farmers, laborers, soldiers. For centuries, tensions simmered between these classes. But Rome had enemies on all sides, and survival required unity. Rome expanded across the Italian peninsula, city by city, war by war. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome had become the dominant power in Italy. But across the Mediterranean, another power ruled the seas: Carthage, a wealthy trading empire based in North Africa. Masters of naval warfare. The clash between Rome and Carthage would become one of the most legendary conflicts in history: the Punic Wars. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE. Rome had little naval experience. Carthage had the strongest navy in the world. Rome did what Rome always did. They adapted. They built a fleet from scratch, hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors. And after years of brutal warfare, Rome won. Carthage was humiliated, but Carthage would not forget. A generation later, a boy swore an oath of eternal hatred toward Rome. His name was Hannibal, Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, Hannibal launched one of the most daring military campaigns ever attempted. He marched his army from Spain, across the Alps, into Italy. War elephants climbed frozen mountain passes. Thousands of soldiers died in the snow. But Hannibal reached Italy, and Rome was unprepared. At the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal surrounded and annihilated a massive Roman army. Tens of thousands of Romans were killed in a single day, one of the greatest military victories in history. Rome stood on the brink of destruction, yet Rome refused to surrender. Year after year, Rome rebuilt its armies. Rome endured. Eventually, Rome carried the war into Africa. At the Battle of Zama, Roman general Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal. Carthage was finished. Rome now ruled the Mediterranean. But victory brought new problems. Wealth flooded into Rome. So did slaves. The gap between rich and poor grew wider. Political corruption spread. The republic began to crack. Ambitious generals realized something dangerous. Loyal armies could bring political power, and one man would change Rome forever: Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was born into a noble Roman family, but his early life was far from secure. Rome was already drowning in political chaos: power struggles, assassinations, civil unrest. Caesar understood something few others did. In Rome, power did not belong to laws. It belonged to influence, to loyalty, to the army. He rose through the political ranks with unmatched charisma, a brilliant speaker, a cunning strategist, a master of public image. But Caesar needed something more: military glory. In 58 BCE, he was appointed governor of Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium. What followed would become one of the most famous military campaigns in history: the Gallic Wars. For nearly a decade, Caesar fought tribal confederations across Western Europe. He built bridges across rivers in days, fortified camps overnight, and wrote detailed accounts of his victories. accounts that made him a legend in Rome. By the end of the campaign, millions had been conquered, thousands enslaved. Rome now stretched to the Atlantic Ocean. But success made Caesar dangerous. The Roman Senate feared him. They feared his popularity. They feared his army. They feared his ambition. In 49 BCE, the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon River. Crossing it would mean civil war. Turning back would mean humiliation. Caesar made his decision. He crossed the Rubicon. Civil war erupted across the Roman world. Caesar moved with lightning speed. One by one, his enemies fell, until only one rival remained, Pompey the Great. At the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar defeated Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt. There he was assassinated. Rome now had a single ruler. In 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was declared dictator for life. For some Romans, he was a hero. For others, a tyrant. A group of senators formed a conspiracy. They believed they were saving the Republic. On March 15th, the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Senate chamber. He was stabbed 23 times. Julius Caesar died at the foot of Pompey's statue, but the conspirators had made a fatal mistake. They had not restored the Republic. They had destroyed it. Rome plunged into another civil war, and from the ashes would rise Rome's first emperor, Octavian, the man who would become Augustus. After Caesar's death, Rome stood leaderless. Chaos returned to the Republic. Power vacuums never remain empty for long. Three men rose to claim Caesar's legacy: Octavian, Mark Antony, Lepidus. They formed the Second Triumvirate, an alliance built not on trust, but necessity. Their first goal was revenge. They hunted down Caesar's assassins. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, the conspirators were defeated. The Republic's defenders were gone. But unity among the triumvirs did not last. Lepidus was pushed aside. Only two men remained: Octavian in the west, Mark Antony in the east. At first, Antony ruled from Egypt alongside Cleopatra, the powerful queen of the Nile. Their alliance became romantic, political, and dangerous. In Rome, Octavian used propaganda to turn the people against Antony. He portrayed Antony as a traitor, a man bewitched by a foreign queen. In 31 BCE, the final confrontation came: the Battle of Actium, a massive naval clash off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra. Both fled to Egypt. Both chose death over capture. Octavian stood alone. In 27 BCE, the Roman Senate granted him a new title: Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Republic was gone. The Roman Empire had begun. Calm, hopeful music. Under Augustus, Rome entered a golden age, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For over 200 years, the empire would enjoy stability and prosperity. Roads stretched across continents. Aqueducts carried fresh water to cities. Trade connected Europe, Africa, and Asia. Rome became the center of the known world. At its height, the empire held over 60 million people, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Middle East. Roman engineering reshaped civilization. Concrete buildings, massive amphitheaters, public baths, libraries, and laws that would influence the world for millennia. But empires do not last forever, and the seeds of Rome's fall were already being planted. As the empire grew larger, it became harder to control. Corruption spread through the government. Wealth became concentrated in the hands of the few. The gap between rich and poor widened. Political instability returned. In the year 180 CE, Emperor Marcus Aurelius died. He was known as the last of the 5 good emperors, a philosopher king, a symbol of stability. His son Commodus took the throne. He was not like his father. Commodus ruled with vanity and cruelty. He believed himself to be a living god. He fought in gladiator games for spectacle. He renamed Rome after himself. His assassination in 192 CE ended the Golden Age. What followed was the crisis of the 3rd century. For 50 years, Rome nearly collapsed. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession. Some ruled for months, some ruled for days. Civil wars drained the empire's resources. Meanwhile, enemies gathered at the borders. Germanic tribes pushed from the north. Persian armies attacked from the east. The empire was under siege. In 284 CE, a soldier named Diocletian seized power. He understood the empire was too vast for one ruler, so he divided it. The Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. 2 capitals, 2 administrations, 1 empire in name. The East grew wealthy and stable. The West struggled. In 312 CE, another emperor changed history forever. Constantine the Great. Before a decisive battle, he claimed to see a vision in the sky, a symbol of Christianity. After victory, Constantine legalized Christianity across the empire, a religion once persecuted, now protected, and soon dominant. He founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople, a city that would become one of the most powerful in history. But the Western Empire continued to weaken. Economic collapse, political corruption, endless invasions. In 410 CE, the unthinkable happened. The city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. For the first time in 800 years, Rome fell to an enemy. The psychological blow was devastating. The empire never fully recovered. In 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. The Western Roman Empire had fallen. The ancient world had ended. But history was far from over. A new era was about to begin, the Middle Ages.